All right, welcome everybody. We just hit go to let everybody in, and I was just saying to Liz that this is actually the first time we're doing a workshop using Teams instead of Zoom, so we're learning as we go here, but I think we've let everybody in. I'm just going to take a peek to make sure nobody's waiting, but I think we're good. And so we'll just give it a couple minutes. We find people run a few minutes behind on these things, and so we'll just give a few minutes for people to arrive. But we also value your time and our time, and so we won't wait too long. And people can always, jump in a little bit late. Nice to see some familiar faces. Hi, Denise. This is the fun part about these things, is you actually get to see people.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us who don't leave our office very often.
Hi, Diane.
Oh, it's cutting me off here. I was trying to find, I see Diane saying she's the coordinator for South Delta FAMIT, and then it stops. So I'm actually trying to figure out what the latter part is.
Oh, you're muted, Diane, if you want to introduce your title.
I'm trying to press mine and unmute. It's not happening.
Oh, yeah. There you go. You're good. We can hear
you. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Mm.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, coordinator of South Delta Family Resource Center, and also it's also the Ladner ECD hub on Bridge Street.
Oh, okay.
There. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course, right behind us here, across the parking lot.
You. Yeah, I'm not there now. Yeah. I'm at home myself. Sorry, but yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've been there.
Well, thanks for coming.
Quite a few years now. It's a program of Boys and Girls Club, but it's a CAPC program, community action program for children, with funding from the Public Health Agency of Canada and MCFD.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, I have known about the hub, but that's great. We're glad you're here. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. The locals renamed it the hub, just the hub years ago.
Yeah. Well, why don't we get started? I'm sure people will continue to trickle in, and I don't think I have to let them in at this point. I think they can just jump in, but if they have to be let in, I will try to figure out how to do that. So thanks everybody for coming. We're really glad you're here. Just by way of reminder, we did say it on the registration, we are recording the session to tonight because we've had many requests from people going, oh, we can't come, but we really want to see it. Is there a video? So we are going to record it and post it. Names are anonymous. We're the only ones who can actually see your names. And so you won't be identified that way. But one of the things we really love doing here at the clinic is providing free resources for people and education, because we know everything costs money, including us. And so we love to partner with our friends in the community and provide value, without necessarily asking for money, because, we figure that just helps people. And if we can help people, then that's a win. So we're really glad you're here. We're appreciative of your time. I'm not going to belabor too much of the point on my end, because I'm not the expert that you want to hear from tonight for the most part. I'm going to chime in with color commentary here and there, because I can't really help myself. But before we start, I'm not sure where everybody is at, but I did want to acknowledge here at the clinic in Ladner, we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsawwassen First Nation and the Musqueam First Nation, whose shared traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories we reside, learn, work, and gather. And we're so appreciative that we get to do all these things in such a wonderful corner of the world. If you don't know who we are, my guess is you know something about us, because you found this probably through our social media feeds. But we are a private mental health clinic. that specializes in mental health and in chronic pain and chronic health condition management. We are very much interdisciplinary, so we do a lot of counseling, but we've got neurofeedback, massage therapy, and we have an art studio that my wife, who is on this call, is on, and I would love to embarrass her, but I'm not going to. You can tell her by her pink hair. She does really cool stuff in our art studio. And the whole reason we exist is because we started in 2015 because we saw gaps in services and we wanted to make sure people didn't fall through the cracks, and we wanted to do something about that. And so we started in 2015 with me, myself, and I, and a day and a half of clients, and my wife in the art studio. And now we've got 27 staff, and we take up about 70% of the building. And now, since we don't have enough to do, we've actually launched a charity called the Step Forward Health Society because we found that people needed even more help to access stuff. And so now we're launching the charity to try to actually do even more good and make sure that people can access the services they need and that money doesn't get in the way. So that's real quick about us. And I'm really excited because my background is as a counselor. I'm a registered clinical counselor, registered marriage and family therapist, and I also have the joy of training the next generation of therapists. And we have interns here at the clinic, anywhere from 2 to 7 interns at any given point in time, because we really believe that our job is to give back and to train the next generation, because we're all getting old and we're not going to be around forever. And so we want to make sure that that we do what was done for us and help the next ones who are coming along. And part of my training, I do learn about neurobiology and physiology on all of that, partly because I'm also a neurophysiology geek and I just do that in my spare time. But I am not an expert in nutrition. My expertise is on the psych side of eating and nutrition and some of how that works. But when we aren't the experts, we try to find the people who are and bring them in and have them tell you what you need to know. And so I'm not going to introduce Liz other than to say we got to know each other a little bit over the last little while, and she's fantastic. We're very careful with who we connect with, and it's got to align with kind of how we think it interacts with the world that we live in mental health and appropriate ways of approaching different things. And I can't say enough good things about Liz and how she looks at nutrition and health and eating. And I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. And I will let her take over and introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you for having me here. Thanks, everyone, for taking some time out of your Wednesday evening to be here, too. I'm really excited. We have a little over an hour. We'll go until about 8 o'clock, but my biggest fault is that I always go over time, so I'll try to keep it within time today. So let me share my screen with you guys, and I'll introduce myself on the second slide here. Can everyone see this? Can you see that, Andrew?
All good.
Yeah, okay, awesome. So we're going to be focusing primarily today on how nutrition can support your mental health. And their mental health and nutrition are very interrelated. And we're going to dive into as much as we can kind of within an hour, but it will be kind of a higher level overview. So before we get started, I just wanted to say a little bit about me. So I was raised in Ladner. You might be wondering why my practice is called Yaletown Nutrition and what I'm doing promoting myself in South Delta. But I did move out to Vancouver when I went to UBC and graduated in 2016. I started as a clinical dietitian at Vancouver General Hospital. And then shortly after working as a clinical dietitian, I opened my own private practice and was living in Yaletown at the time, hence the name. We might rebrand in the future, who knows? But for now, we're still Yaletown Nutrition. I recently moved back once I had kids, and so now living here, raising the girls, and really hoping to be a resource for people that are living in South Delta, but also all across BC, because my practices are virtual, in helping people with their relationship with food and their healthy eating strategies. So I'm very, very passionate about intuitive eating, helping people break away from diet culture and disordered eating, very passionate about weight inclusive care and helping people feel at home and comfortable in their bodies at any shape or size. I love my girls and sushi. camping, a clean kitchen probably makes me the happiest, and just anything outside. So that's a little bit about me. So just a disclaimer before we get started is that I, of course, don't have time to assess every single person individually. So I just want everyone to know that this is for educational purposes only. If you have received different medical advice or different diagnoses from your healthcare providers, of course, take all of this with a grain of salt and consult your healthcare professionals to address your specific needs. And that can be me if you need support later on afterwards. So for today, we're going to do as much as we can with the time, but these are kind of the 5 learning objectives that I have. We'll start a little bit with how mental health and nutrition impact each other. We're going to identify how our relationship with food impacts our mental health. We'll learn some basic strategies to create kind of consistent, balanced, and varied eating in our day-to-day routine. We'll touch on a few key nutrients that impact mental health. And if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about how we eat and why we eat. So around more of the mindfulness around eating and the different types of hunger. I should mention that if you guys do have any questions that come up, feel free to pop on, unmute yourself, jump in at any time, or you can type it in the chat box, and I can either address it in the moment or we'll do it at the very end. We'll have some time for questions afterwards.
And if you have questions that you want to ask privately for any reason, feel free to throw those in the Q&A, and I'll be able to track those, and we'll do our best to answer all the ones we can.
Okay, so when we think about how nutrition and mental health are impacted, I should ask Andrew, are my slides progressing as I switch through them?
All good.
Okay, awesome. So this is a higher level overview of how the two are related. And it is a cycle where we can jump in at any point in this cycle. It doesn't necessarily mean that any causes another, but we do start to see that as we jump in at any point in this cycle, they are influencing the next part of it. So if, for example, we started with poor mental health at the top here, this can, for a variety of reasons, lead to a decreased ability to plan or shop or cook, whether it be due to low energy, low motivation, low abilities, low cooking skills. That might lead to irregular eating habits, which then subsequently leads to inadequate energy and nutrient intake. And when we aren't eating regularly or consistently or enough for our bodies, that can lead to low energy, low mood, poor concentration. This can impact our gut health if our diet is very limited or inadequate. And it can also lead to nutrient deficiencies. And any one of those things can then lead to maybe more binge type behaviors, emotional eating, mindless eating, more carb cravings, as our body seeks out quick sources of energy and ways to maybe meet those needs or those gaps that were missed earlier on in the day or in the days prior. And then all of those things, the low mood, low energy, poor gut health, emotional eating, binge eating, all of that can then come back and contribute or add to the negative mental health that we had already been experiencing. Now, we may have started with poor mental health that can be impacted by a variety of different factors. And I really want to highlight that there are tons of influencing factors here that play into this cycle. It definitely isn't as simple as just the cycle itself. But if, for example, I did start with poor mental health that was influenced by maybe genetics or past trauma or adverse childhood events that then contributed into this cycle, I may have a hard time getting out of it. And so we do need to find ways nutritionally to potentially break that cycle and not have the inconsistent eating or irregular eating habits contribute further. These influencing factors on the side include things like our social determinants of health, like social injustice, education level, income level, even access to food is of course going to influence this. And then we also see other impacts like the global pandemic, even social media. So someone may have their initiation into this cycle maybe from social media, and the encouragement of restrictive eating behaviors, maybe for the purposes of weight loss or in the purposes of trying to seek out healthy eating, which then leads to irregular eating habits, maybe from intermittent fasting or a restrictive diet, and then continuing on with the cycle again. And then that in and of itself could influence or negatively impact our mental health as well. Andrew, did you want to add anything to this or?
Nope, I think you got it covered.
Okay. So it is really, it is complex, and I really want to remove any guilt or shame that may come from looking at this cycle. None of the the influencing factors here are your fault in any way. And the fact that the cycle continues isn't your fault either. There are a lot of different reasons why we may find ourselves in these situations. This is only to bring awareness to what may be happening and what may be contributing to how we feel on a daily basis. And my goal from today is if we can empower you to maybe find one potential strategy, it could be really, really small, to potentially lessen the effects of any points of these cycle or break the cycle altogether, then we can slowly work towards removing nutritional inadequacies as being a contributing piece of our mental health status. So if we look at kind of taking a step back, how can nutrition improve our mental health? It can really come down to 4 things. And of course, it may not fix everything, but it can significantly improve things like our energy levels, our ability to think clearly, our mood, and even just lessen the stress and anxiety that the brain may feel when we aren't getting enough calories. So that first piece of getting enough food, enough fuel regularly throughout the day is probably my number 1 nutrition priority for anyone that I work with. The next piece there will be around balance. So here, if I can balance my meals and my snacks and my overall diet, then this helps to stabilize blood sugar levels and provide more regular energy, for example, in the afternoons when we might feel that dip in energy. So we'll talk a little bit about what balance means later on. The third is adequacy. So am I getting all of the nutrients that my brain and my nervous system and my body needs on a regular enough basis so that it can function optimally? And the fourth is variety. So am I eating enough of a variety of foods so that I can cover most of my nutritional bases, but also provide a variety of fibers and prebiotics to my gut bacteria, which are very heavily interrelated to my mental health and how my brain functions as well. We'll talk a little bit about the gut-brain axis later on. So where do we get our nutrition information? And I don't know about you, but before I was a dietitian, it often came to Dr. Google. So this is where if I heard something or someone was talking about something or I was curious about a question about what I should be eating, right to Google. And the problem with that is that there's so much conflicting information about nutrition. There's so many people out there that claim to have all the answers, but the problem is that everybody is different. What works for someone's not going to work for someone else. And very few people promoting information online have very little educational background in nutrition. So you'll see things like, don't eat too much fruit because it has too much sugar, or eggs are too high in cholesterol, so you can't eat them every day, or we should eat mostly fats and you should try and avoid carbohydrates, or these vegetables are inflammatory and don't eat them. This creates a lot of confusion. And the more we lose trust in our ability to feed ourselves, the more we start to seek out lists of black and white thinking when it comes to nutrition. So good and bad foods. And when we're very confused, it becomes very easy to want to follow some sort of diet plan, whether it is Atkins or the ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting or the South Beach diet or counting macronutrients. There's hundreds of different diets out there, and they all come down to the same thing: good foods and bad foods, or good times and bad times of eating, leading to external rules that guide your eating and encourage you to ignore those internal cues that are meant to help us know when our bodies should be eating and what feels good for us. So these restrictive diets, if there was ever a list of foods that you can't eat or times that you can't eat or rules that you have to follow, it often will lead to maybe one or multiple of some of these things. So it could lead to malnutrition if I'm cutting out entire food groups, unnecessarily restricting foods that my body loves or does really well with, social isolation because I can't eat certain foods that other people are eating, stress and making food choices because I have limited food options, guilt and shame when I inevitably eat the things that I was trying to avoid, disconnect with my body because I don't trust my body when it craves the things that I was told I shouldn't be eating, according to the internet. And it's a lot of work to follow a specific diet plan that wasn't necessarily made or meant to be for our bodies. And this might be really small, too small maybe for some of you to see, depending on your screen. But this just highlights the restrict binge cycle, which kind of comes back to the cycle that I showed around mental health and nutrition. But this one can come from, so it usually starts from a point of restriction, which could be intentional, where I'm intentionally trying to skip a meal or intentionally trying to restrict certain food groups or trying to eat a certain amount of calories each day. Or it can be unintentional. Maybe I have been struggling with my mental health lately and I haven't found the ability or the motivation to get to the grocery store or cook meals regularly. And it could also be that there just hasn't been enough time or I have too much going on to ensure that my body is fueled regularly throughout the day. Any form of this restriction or undernourishment comes to this second piece here where it sends the message to the body that there isn't enough food for its needs. So we feel deprived, our energy levels are low, and to protect itself, we slow our metabolism down to conserve energy. We increase our hunger hormones and our cravings and our urge to eat. And we usually crave those high carb, high fat foods that give us quick sources of energy for our brain. And then that inevitably leads to us eating because our body is hardwired to protect ourselves. So whenever we counter that restriction with that inevitable binge, I don't want you to feel that guilt and shame around it because it's your body's physiological mechanism of keeping you alive. But in our society, we're taught to feel that guilt and shame because we're told that we lack willpower, we lack control around food, we can't be trusted around certain foods, and we shouldn't keep certain foods in the house. And then we continue to fuel that idea that we needed more of those restrictions in the first place. And we start again with that Monday morning diet or cleanse or New Year's Eve detox, which leads that cycle to starting right all over again. Some people experience this cycle on a daily basis. Others, it might be like a weekly Monday to Friday. Things feel kind of in control and restricted, but then the weekend feels like those quote unquote cheat days. And some people do this maybe on a monthly basis, and then there might be a week-long binge that follows every month-long diet that they try. So here, it seems obvious and simple, but I understand how challenging this can be. The best point to break this cycle is to no longer re-engage in that restriction. And so today we're going to talk about how do we eat if we aren't following a rule list or a list of yes and no foods. How do we eat if I'm not following a specific diet plan or something that I found online or social media? And as we're kind of doing this, my ultimate goal, as I mentioned in a little bit about me at the beginning, is to help people move towards intuitive eating. Now, this slide might feel really overwhelming, but it essentially comes down to a spectrum of where our relationship with food falls. So we can fall anywhere along this from the green zone to the red zone, and it can also change throughout our lifetime. But on the left-hand side, so this green zone that I'm passionate about helping people work towards is what we call intuitive eating. And this is where we use our internal cues to guide what, when, and how, and where we eat. So we're using our hunger and fullness cues to guide when and how much. We seek out foods that are for nourishment and nutrition, but also maybe for pleasure and enjoyment and connection. We're able to eat a variety of foods. We have a variety of emotional coping strategies. So food might not be our only coping strategy when it comes to those negative emotions. And we're able to engage in movement and physical activity for the benefits of reducing stress and improving our flexibility and improving our strength. Less so than the middle section here, where when we engage in disordered eating, we might use, for example, time-restricted feeding, like intermittent fasting, where I ignore my hunger and fullness cues at certain times of the day. This might lead to that restrict binge cycle that leads to me eating past my comfortable fullness sometimes. I might be restricting my eating for weight control. I might be being physically active solely to burn calories and for weight control. And I might be using food regularly or as my only coping strategy to regulate or manage my emotions. Now, the reason why it can be really helpful for us to move away from disordered eating and dieting into intuitive eating is because studies show that 1 in 4 disordered eaters go on to develop a full-on eating disorder. And this can be things like bulimia, anorexia, even binge eating disorder, or orthorexia, where we have an obsession with only eating healthy or quote unquote clean foods. So once again, no guilt and shame on where you might fall here, but just to bring awareness to what you think your relationship with food might be and how we can slowly work to move towards the intuitive eating side or the green zone. And really getting back to how we ate when we were toddlers, before we were influenced by the world and adults in our lives and the internet.
If I can jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Just on the spectrum of eating behavior, there's a couple things that I think are really important to know from a psychological perspective. One, and this is true of lots of things, but one thing I always want to highlight for people is there's always a reason you do what you do. And you're not stupid. It's not because there's something wrong with you. As humans, generally speaking, we are pretty intelligent beings. And if there wasn't a payoff, we wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And there's also other factors, like for disordered eating, one of the ones that I've seen a lot is like when people have particular health conditions, it might actually force them in many ways into disordered eating. Mm-hmm. And it's not that they're actually trying to restrict it or they're actually trying to lose weight, or it's like, well, for instance, I had a health thing in 2016 where like everything I ate was painful. It didn't matter what it was, it just hurt. And so I literally wouldn't eat all day. I wasn't trying not to. I actually stopped feeling hungry, mm-hmm. And, when I look back, my pattern was very disordered, but I wasn't trying to lose weight. I wasn't trying to do anything. It's just literally everything I ate hurt. Mm-hmm. And so there's always reasons, including, when you binge, there's a reason people binge. Mm-hmm. And if for no other reason, it's because it's usually carbs. And the reason we binge carbs is because it gives us dopamine. Mm-hmm. And dopamine is exactly what we're looking for when we're in pain. Yeah. We actually take drugs to do this. And so guess what? Food can do it too. And it works really well in the moment, yeah. And so I always want to highlight for people, like, we always have a reason for doing what we're doing. It's not always a great long-term strategy, but there's always a reason. And the other piece with the eating disorders is there's a lot of misconceptions around why eating disorders happen. And, we don't have time to go through all of them, but there's a lot of misconceptions. And what's really important to understand is, like, this is not because the internet is an evil landscape. Don't get me wrong. There's lots of problems with the internet, mm-hmm. And it's not because of all this social stuff and all, because the reason people have eating disorders is the same reason people use cocaine, or they, work too hard, or they work out too much, or they do all this. It's a problem in the relationship that we have with ourselves and the relationship we have with the world. Mm-hmm. And so anytime there's a problem in our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with the world, we're going to find some way to cope with that. Mm-hmm. And for some people, it's around eating. Mm. And so I just wanted to throw that in because I think it's really important that we understand that there's a lot of misconceptions. And from a psychological side, a lot of the misconceptions just aren't true. But they seem reasonable to us. But again, it leads to a lot of guilt and shame for people who end up with disordered eating or an eating disorder because a lot of the misconceptions make it sound like, well, I'm just doing something wrong and this is my fault, when actually it's human nature.
Yeah. Yeah, very good point. Thank you so much for adding that in. Yeah, like with eating disorders specifically, a lot of the time it's a way to gain control when we've lost control in other aspects of our lives. And so it's not because we started eating a certain way on the internet and that led to an eating disorder. But we do see a very big correlation between those who engage in disordered eating and a little bit of a slippery slope towards the development of eating disorders. But of course, as Andrew said, like it's so complex, and not everyone who restricts their eating is going to develop an eating disorder. There has to be other factors that are involved. And I do appreciate the disordered eating piece not being a choice. Sometimes there are reasons, like you said, with digestive issues or even just the diagnosis of diabetes, and trying to sort through and figure out how we eat with a new medical condition or new life situations that have been passed to us. It's definitely not a source of personal blame or anything like that. It's just being aware of kind of where you might fall. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Mm-hmm. Okay, so when people think about, well, what does healthy eating even mean then? And how do I know what is healthy for me? Because there does seem to be so much confusion around what is deemed healthy. And the thing that I find really problematic and confusing about social media and the internet is that we focus a lot about physical health when they talk about healthy eating. And we will solely categorize foods based on if they have physically health promoting benefits, like maybe they have more vitamins and minerals and fiber, or maybe they're lower in sodium or saturated fat. And it completely ignores all the other aspects or dimensions of what health and wellness actually mean to people. So, of course, this is a simplified version of what health might mean to you, but our physical health is just as important as our emotional well-being and our social well-being and our financial situation and our spiritual health. And so all of these factors play a role into our overall wellness. And so it's important to think about that from a food lens as well. Whereas sometimes I might choose foods based on their physical benefits. Other times I might choose foods based on their emotional benefits or their social benefits, like sharing French fries at happy hour with my best friend, or like Andrew noted, choosing maybe higher carb foods that give me that dopamine or improve my energy levels from my really low energy and improve my emotional coping that evening, for example. Even financially, I may be making choices that are solely based on finances when it comes to food, and that's okay too. We do need to prioritize what will help our wellness wheel work the best or function the best in that time of our lives. And so when you're eating a food and you're feeling guilty about maybe eating something that doesn't seem or feel healthy, take a step back and ask yourself, well, what aspect of my health is this promoting right now? And there is always something positive that we can bring out of a specific food or eating situation that may help lessen that guilt or shame that may come from eating something that you heard about was quote unquote bad for you. And just to kind of emphasize that even more, healthy eating, it's obviously more than just these three, but it can come down to nutrition. So what we're actually eating, like when and what do our snacks look like, and am I getting enough vitamins? But healthy eating is also incorporated with our relationship with food. So how I feel about the foods that I'm eating. Am I able to tune in with my body? Do I have coping skills? And then the relationship with my body as well. So do I have how is my body image? And do I trust my body and respect my body and engage in enjoyable movement and those kinds of things? So it is so much more than just making sure that I hit my macros each and every day or eat a certain number of calories. So it does come back to that pleasure and connection and nourishment and tradition, not just, the numbers that we might focus on a lot. So I'm going to jump into a little bit of the strategies that can help build those consistent eating patterns that have been shown time and time again to promote improved mental health outcomes. And so the first piece is around when we eat. So we do see that when people are able to eat more consistently and regularly throughout the day, we end up with more reliable hunger cues because our body can learn to expect and anticipate food more regularly. We usually will see more opportunities in the day to get all the nutrients you need, better energy levels, a reduction in cravings. Cravings can sometimes come from our body being underfueled. So if I can eat more regularly and consistently, it won't lead to the point where my brain is now screaming at me to get any source of quick energy that it can from its immediate environment. Reduce those chances of overeating or eating really quickly or binge eating because of that undernutrition, and can help promote more regular digestion and decrease bloating when we create more of a consistent pattern. So this is going to look different for every single person, and take what works for you from this and leave the rest behind. But I recommend trying to aim to break your fast within about 2 hours of getting out of bed. And this will change depending on the day of the week. But often if we wait too long or go into our day and we're now working or engaging in movement or thinking or taking care of kids or expecting and doing all these things with our brain and bodies, and we haven't provided it with a source of protein or carbs or fat, we may not have the fuel and the optimized ability to do the things that we're hoping to do. Once we break that fast, the body will then usually get hungry again sooner, which people feel like is a bad thing, but it's a really positive thing because the body now can have more regular hunger cues. So usually, depending on how big and balanced that meal was, people will start to get hungry again every 3 to 4 hours again throughout the day. Lots of things change this. Like if I'm unable to eat large meals, I might get hungry sooner. If I don't have access to as much protein or fiber-rich foods, I might get hungry sooner. But generally, ask yourself, do I break my fast early in the day? And am I giving it enough eating opportunities throughout the day so that I'm having at least 4 or 5 chances for fuel and for nourishment? So let's talk a little bit about the meals to start. And I should say, like, the meals, most people will do, not everyone, but most people do like a breakfast, a lunch, and then a dinner. And if your meals do end up being more than 4 hours apart, we want to try and plan for a snack in between there. And so let's talk about the meals to begin with. And I often will use the new Canada's Food Guide from 2019 just as a visual. It's of course not perfect, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but it's a great starting point. And the thing I love about this new one is that there's no portion sizes, there's no serving sizes, there's no numbers of any kind. You decide how big or small of a plate you need to feel satisfied or full at any given meal. And then we're going to use kind of a proportion-based system to just try and balance out the meal. So this one shows a quarter protein, so the top right quarter, a quarter carbohydrates or something starchy, and then half fruits and vegetables. This is going to be different if, for example, you are more active. You might be doing more a third, and a third, where we need more protein and carbs for fuel, and we'll de-emphasize the veggies a little bit. Other people who might have a really small appetite or can't eat a lot in one sitting also might do more of the protein and carbs and won't fill half of their plate with vegetables. But when we're starting out, if we can try and aim for just one of each category, doesn't really matter how much of the plate it takes up, but if we try to get one of each category on the plate, that gives us more opportunities and more variety day after day. So the protein piece here, this is what keeps us full for longer. It's the building blocks for our body, makes enzymes and hormones and fights infection. If you can aim for at least a quarter of your meals to be something rich in protein, this will help keep you full for longer and slow the digestion of carbohydrates from your meal. So your blood sugar levels won't spike as quickly. So this can come from animal products if you are an omnivore. So meat, poultry, fish, shellfish, eggs, and dairy. So even things like cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, all wonderful sources of protein. And if you are vegetarian or vegan, and or even if you're not, plant-based proteins are really wonderful for heart health because they have more fiber and heart healthy fats in them. These are going to be things like your legumes, so beans, soy, like tofu, tempeh, edamame beans, lentils, chickpeas, and then nuts and seeds. And then any dairy alternatives made from soy are also a good protein source. So like soy milk or soy yogurts, for example. So once I have a good protein source that's going to keep me full for longer, then I want to try and incorporate something starchy. So right now, 30 years ago, we were very anti-fat. Everything was low-fat cream cheese and low-fat yogurt and low-fat this. Now we're currently in a phase of anti-carb. So a lot of the people I meet with are afraid of carbs or restricting carbohydrates or feel like this is the devil when it comes to meeting their health and wellness goals. I really encourage people to incorporate a little bit of something starchy in their meals because this is your main source of energy. So these carbs or these starches are going to be broken down into sugars or glucose, and that is the main source of fuel for your brain cells, your heart cells, your muscle cells, all of the cells in your body. So if I can get regular sources of energy throughout the day, it will lessen the likelihood of having big cravings for carbohydrates in the afternoons and or evenings. They are also wonderful sources of a lot of the B vitamins like folic acid and niacin and thiamine, magnesium, and they're wonderful sources of fiber too. So we see in the research, people who consume particularly whole grains and even starchy vegetables have a reduced risk of things like cancer and diabetes and heart disease as well. So this can come from grains like oats and rice, and quinoa is kind of a pseudo grain. Grain products like chapatis, tortillas, English muffins, cereals, orzo, and it can come from starchy vegetables. So potatoes, yams, and squashes can also be our fuel source for that meal too. And then the third part of the plate is going to be the veggies and fruits. So this doesn't need to be half a part of the plate, but if we can add a little bit of color into our breakfast, lunches, and dinners, it helps us get more of those vitamins and minerals and antioxidants that help reduce inflammation, help our nerves function properly, help our brain function properly, and has been shown time and time again to reduce our risk of chronic diseases like cancer, high blood pressure, stroke. These foods are also lower in energy. So I mention this because if we're consuming a lot of fruits and vegetables at our meals and getting really full on them, and then finding that we are hungry really quickly after or having more cravings shortly after the meal, it might just be a sign that we need to rebalance and redistribute the sections of the plate a little bit. So they're really nutritious and awesome for you, but if I'm only eating fruits and vegetables, our bodies will definitely feel that. Now, one part that I wish the Canada's Food Guide had is a little sliver for fats, because fats are really crucial for the protection of your vital organs in your body. They're needed for our brain health. They also help us absorb fat-soluble vitamins. They improve the mouthfeel and texture of the foods that you're eating. And they also are a great source of energy too. So don't be afraid to use dressing on your salad and roast your vegetables in oil and put butter on your toast, as that's all part of what's going to help you feel your best for the few hours that follow a specific meal. So if we're trying to just break down basic meal planning, it could be I'm planning this on the weekend on Saturday morning and figuring out what I'm going to buy for the whole week, or it could be as I'm standing in my fridge at 5:30 figuring out what I'm going to make for dinner. If you keep these 4 steps in your mind, you'll be more consistent in creating those balanced meals. So I'll find a easy, quick, accessible protein. Maybe it's eggs. I'm going to find some grains of some sort. Maybe it's ramen noodles from the pantry. Add some frozen peas to it, and then I'll use maybe the eggs will have fat, but I might add some extra fats or cheese or something to that meal just to kind of boost it up a little bit. It doesn't need to be complicated. So some examples of this might be for breakfast. The protein could be like eggs with toast, and then I might have avocado or tomato or a fruit on the side. And then the fats and flavors can be butter or avocado on that toast. Could also do an oatmeal where I have oats as the starch, and then I'm going to add in some nuts or seeds or milk or soy milk or even protein powder in there. Add some sort of fruit, and then you can add, of course, some flavors and seasonings to make that taste a little better. Lunches can be things like wraps or sandwiches where the tortilla wrap or the bread is your grain. It could also be rice if you wanted to do a rice bowl, any sort of protein that's accessible to you, some vegetables, and then adding some condiments, for example, to make that more flavorful, even cheese. I also will use soup a lot. Great for the warm weather now. It can be homemade, it can be canned. No need to have to make everything from scratch. If I'm choosing a soup that's going to be pre-made, I can choose one that's got protein like lentils or chicken or turkey or beans. And there's usually vegetables in there as well. And then I'll just be intentional about adding toast or crackers or something to the side just to balance out that meal a little bit. Dinners. So it could be a simple pasta where I'm doing like frozen meatballs, or maybe I make them, or I add ground beef or ground turkey to the sauce. If I'm vegan, I might do like a lentil bolognese or crumbled tofu. And then we'll do some sort of pasta. It doesn't need to be whole wheat all the time. We kind of encourage, if people can get maybe 25 to 50% of their grains being whole, then that's awesome for extra fiber. But if you prefer white pasta, there's a lot of nutritional benefits to white pasta as well. If you can load up on veggies either in the sauce or do a side vegetable, and then throw some olive oil or Parmesan cheese or something in there too. Stir fries or noodle bowls, any sort of protein, tofu, shrimp, chicken, the rice or rice noodles, brown or white, and then all of the veggie mix-ins, and then your favorite sauce. So people can take it a little step further. So if you're finding that your mental health has been negatively impairing your ability to prepare foods consistently, I recommend two things. One is to try and make a list of easy foods that are already balanced so that you can just keep that, even tape it to your fridge, so that on the days where it may be a little bit more of a struggle to get something on the table, you can go to that list and just look at something. I can also send out a list of meal ideas afterwards too, but easy breakfast, easy lunches, easy dinners that include some simple proteins, carbs, and veggies and fats. Another thing that can be really key to helping us be more successful with this is keeping very simple ingredients on hand all the time. So if we're able to grocery shop, or maybe we grocery shop online or someone grocery shops for us, having easy to cook proteins like canned fish, even things like canned sardines that don't even need to be repurposed in any way, blocks of tofu that could be eaten cold, even the smoked tofu or dessert tofus. Eggs are really simple, Greek yogurt, things that don't need a lot of preparation. And then simple carbs like cereal or ramen noodles or pasta or granola, bread, buns, English muffins, bagels, easy to put together. And then fruits and veggies that may not require any preparation at all. So fresh fruits and veggies, cucumbers, baby carrots, cherry tomatoes, apples, bananas, oranges. And I will often keep a bag of frozen fruit and frozen veggies in the freezer so that I can pull those out, even microwave them and throw a sauce on them in kind of a bind, or throw them in a smoothie, like frozen blueberries into a quick smoothie. So finding easy ways during those maybe more difficult times to put something together that will potentially help your body feel a little bit better. Now, one of the pieces that might fall short for many, and it did for me for a really long time, is snacking. I don't know, there seems to be like a negative connotation with snacking. People feel like they shouldn't snack, but most of us snack. It just ends up being a snackcident because we didn't plan to do it. So if we can intentionally plan to have snacks in between meals, we can help fill those sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 hour gaps where our bodies are going to feel deprived and low energy. So if we can incorporate a protein or fat and something that's got some carbs in it, pair that together. So a protein and a carb, together will help to just kind of sustain us for a little bit longer. So the protein's going to keep you full and the carb's going to give you a bit of energy. So this might be things like yogurt and berries, or nut butter on apple slices or bananas or toast, cheese and crackers or cheese and fruit, even things like a dip like hummus or bean dip with veggies or pita bread or pretzel crackers of some sort. Nuts could be trail mix, almonds, mixed nuts with grapes or any sort of fruit that you like. Eggs or egg salad with, or even tuna salad with crackers or cucumbers, or even on toast. So a combination of a protein with a carb at that 10 a.m. slump, or that 3 p.m. craving, or that 9 p.m. indigestion, all of that can just help fill that void where I would have just eaten a box of crackers and then maybe not felt super great afterwards because of it. So being intentional with our snacks can really, really help. Okay, so we're going to move on to 4 key nutrients that are often lacking in Canadians' diets that have been shown to contribute to our mental health and how our nervous system or brain functions. So the first one here is vitamin D. It's crucial to our brain, bone, and immune health. And we usually can make it in our skin when we're exposed to adequate sunlight. But when we live too far north from the equator, like we do in Canada, our exposure to enough UV rays throughout the year usually is limited. Also, if we're wearing sunscreen, or as we get older, or if we have darker colored skin, all of those things impair our skin's ability to make enough vitamin D. So I believe the last number I saw was, I think it was 30 to 40% of Canadians are vitamin D deficient. And so this can impact things like our nervous system function, our immune health, and our bone health as well. So I do often recommend that most Canadians take a vitamin D supplement. We start vitamin D drops for infants, and I recommend that up until adolescence. Not the D drops, but at least 400 international units per day. For adults, I recommend at least 1,000 international units a day. And then over the age of 50, I recommend increasing that to 2,000 international units per day. You can also get blood work done. So if you've been shown to be deficient, you might need way more than 2,000 a day to get you back within that normal range. But usually 1,000 or 2,000 is enough for that maintenance level that we're looking for optimal health. I should mention there are very few food sources of vitamin D. I believe you need 11 cups of milk per day to get enough vitamin D. Salmon is a really good source, but we often don't eat salmon regularly enough to get all of our needs for that. So a supplement is usually just a little bit more reliable there. The second is vitamin B12. So vitamin B12 is heavily important, very important for our nervous system function, and it also makes red blood cells. So vitamin B12 is found naturally in animal foods, and it is fortified or added to some meat alternatives, like Eve's veggie ground round, for example. But if we aren't getting 2 to 3 servings a day of animal products or fortified B12 plant-based foods, then we do want to consider taking a vitamin B12 supplement. So I usually recommend them for anyone who is vegan or vegetarian. If you're on antacids, or if you're taking metformin, if you've had gastrointestinal surgery, or if you're over the age of 50, all of that impairs our ability to absorb vitamin B12. So once again, you can have your blood levels tested to find out if you're in the normal range, but I will usually recommend at least like 25 to 100 micrograms per day, or you can take 1,000 micrograms maybe 2 or 3 times per week. Now, the third is omega-3 fatty acids. So these are a type of unsaturated fat that help your body resolve inflammation. And so they're great for preventing chronic disease. They help in cases like osteoarthritis and concussions, and they play a really important part of our brain health as well. So you may have heard of DHA and EPA. These are the biologically active forms of omega-3s, and these are primarily found in fatty fish. So the really oily fishes. So not tuna or cod, but more like salmon and sardines and herring. You will also find them in some enriched eggs where they feed flaxseed to the eggs. You'll see omega-3s kind of listed on the packaging. ALA is another type of omega-3, but it's a lot less biologically active. It has to be converted. And this is the one that's found in things like ground flax and flax oil and walnuts and things like that. So if we are vegan, and I'm consuming a lot of those nuts and seeds, and I don't necessarily have a concern with inflammation, we might be okay. But if you do have any conditions that are associated with inflammation, or you are wanting to increase your omega-3 intake, then I do recommend having an omega-3 supplement, which can come either from fish oil, or you can get it from vegan marine algae oil. And I'll recommend usually around the 500 milligrams per day. And the fourth and final one is iron. So iron's job is to transport oxygen through the body in hemoglobin. And so if we are iron deficient, it can lead to symptoms like fatigue, low energy, low motivation. So this will impact our brain function and our immune function as well. We might be more likely to get sick more often. So we can find iron in two forms. So the heme iron is found in animal products. Highest sources are things like organ meats and octopus and oysters, which I know people don't eat very often. But meat and poultry and fish and shellfish are also wonderful sources. And then we've got the non-heme iron, which is not as well absorbed, but this will be found in things like beans and lentils and seeds and oatmeal. If you are having non-heme iron, so say you are mostly plant-based, try and pair a vitamin C rich food alongside your vegan proteins. So if you're doing the balanced plate, it usually happens naturally on its own. Say, for example, I do beans or lentils or tofu for my protein. As long as I have a fruit or vegetable with that, most of them are wonderful sources of vitamin C, like tomatoes and bell peppers and strawberries and things like that. So the balanced plate will usually cover our bases as long as we're trying to get all three in there. So those are the 4 key nutrients. There's a lot of other ones like zinc and magnesium that play a role, of course, in nervous system function and brain health. But these are the 4 that I most commonly see underconsumed or deficiencies in people. Now, the last little piece that I wanted to highlight, because we talked a little bit about what and when to eat, but the how and why we eat is just as important, if not more, in some cases. So Andrew probably knows a lot more about this than I do, but just kind of narrowing it down to our stress response in a certain state that we can be in. We can either be in that fight or flight response, which is from our sympathetic nervous system. The kind of opposite of that is called the rest and digest or the relaxation state, which is where our parasympathetic nervous system is activated. Now, the reason I bring this up, and you're wondering why I'm relating this to food, is that when we are in fight or flight, our body is prioritizing blood flow to our brain and our heart and our muscles to activate and flee or fight in whatever the stressor or whatever the situation might be. And so what can happen is if we're in that stress state for long periods of time, it can start to impact our digestion because there's less blood flow to the gut. And this a kind of more simple example of this is like if I was really stressed or anxious, some people might experience maybe more diarrhea as the digestive system is trying to get rid of all of that it doesn't have time to deal with. On the other hand, some people, their digestion might come to a complete halt and they might experience more constipation, more bloating, more abdominal pain because the gut just doesn't have enough rest and digest time to deal with the fibers and foods that are sitting there and waiting there for it. So if we can find strategies and ways with our mental health counselors to enter that rest and digest state around mealtime specifically, we can resume those natural processes like digestion and immunity even. There's less of that cortisol and adrenaline circulating, more blood flow to the gut, and we can usually lessen the impact of some of those negative digestive unwanted symptoms that we might experience. Now, one of the ways that we can do this is, if accessible to us, incorporate a little bit of mindfulness into the eating experience. And this is really just checking in and paying attention to what's going on in our bodies in that present moment from a state of curiosity and not judgment. So if things are really busy and really crazy, and I can take a moment to acknowledge how I'm feeling and take a moment to pause. And even if it's 5 minutes that I can set aside to assess if I'm hungry, how my body's feeling, what foods it's being drawn towards, and even bring that into appreciating the look and the smells and the tastes and the textures of that food, it can help shift my body into a more rested state and prime me to be able to pay attention to how that food makes me feel, if it's something I even want to eat, do I enjoy it, and at what point does my body feel satisfied enough that to stop and move away back into whatever I was doing before. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you need to like sit in a room by yourself with no distractions, which as a mom of 2 toddlers, I know is impossible. But if you have an opportunity to even check in for that first bite, even do a body scan or take 5 deep breaths at the beginning of a meal, all of those things can help calm that nervous system a little bit and help us shift into the state of eating and prioritize that eating experience. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, Andrew.
No, I mean, I think this is really good. And I would, no, I think the bit you had about inflammation on the previous slide around stress is really, really important. One of the most, if not the most common sort of medical conditions, if you will, that I see in mental health is IBS.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that said, IBS, in my experience, is sort of the catch-all for anything we can't really explain that's going on that's causing you discomfort. We're just going to call it IBS. That said, it also becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because if you're stressed and these impacts are happening, it's going to affect how you eat. And if it affects how you eat, then you now start probably finding some form of disordered eating going on. And if that's happening, well, now that's impacting your psychology, and around and around and around we go. And so I think that like there's some stuff in there that I think is really, really important and good to know, because it's so common if you're struggling with anxiety, depression, you know, and anything else. And then the piece about mindfulness, I think, is really important. And I know some of us did not grow up with this. I had not heard that until probably after I graduated graduate school. Maybe that belies how old I am at this point, but there's a lot of misconceptions about mindfulness as well, for all kinds of different reasons. And mindfulness really is straightforward. It is just being in the moment without judgment, without attachment to the moment, and just being there. Like that's mindfulness, and it can take all kinds of different forms. And it doesn't have to be like you're sitting and cross-legged singing Kumbaya for 45 minutes, right? It literally can start out at a minute or 30 seconds. And the more you do it, the more your brain and your body learn how to respond to it. And then actually the less time it takes to get the response that you're looking for by being mindful. And so when I started doing it, I literally started at 45 seconds because I couldn't handle any longer. And then eventually over years and years and years, I can get up to like 10 minutes. And I'm still just kind of at 10 minutes most of the time, at least in like intentional mindfulness. My actual mindfulness is like racing cars and playing guitars. So but not everybody rolls that way. But it's really good. It's a really good point around eating is like, even just taking 30 seconds before you sit down and you eat to just go, can act like just that can actually make a tangible difference.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much. I totally agree. And so one of the other pieces that comes along with mindful eating is understanding the reason and the motivation behind why we're eating. And each one of these 4 types of hunger could be a whole hour presentation all by itself. But I just wanted to highlight that there are a lot of different reasons why we eat and a lot of different reasons why we're drawn towards food. And so these are usually it can fall under one of these 4 types of hunger. And that mindfulness piece, as we practice it and get a little bit better at tuning in with our bodies, we can slowly start to identify more often and quicker, what type of hunger our body is experiencing. So the very first type is physical hunger. This is your body's need for energy, for calories, for fuel. If you haven't eaten in 2 to 3 hours and you're feeling interested in food or thinking about food or craving a chocolate bar, it's likely physical hunger. Mouth hunger is cravings. So this is where there's a very specific taste or texture or type of food that you want. This can be physical hunger that you've left unchecked, that you've waited too long and now your body's craving carbs. But it could also be as mundane as finishing my dinner meal. I'm full, but now I want something sweet. And I know specifically what it is that I want. And it's okay to eat for the benefits of pleasure and satisfaction. So physical hunger is a need for energy. Mouth hunger is a need for pleasure, satisfaction, enjoyment from food. And that's okay too. The third one is emotional hunger. So this is using food to cope with, avoid, numb, distract ourselves from a negative emotion that we do not want to be feeling or experiencing. And so nothing wrong with this. We often grow up using food as a very accessible coping tool. But what we can explore as we get older is, do I have other coping tools and strategies in my toolbox? What tools are available to me so that brownies or ice cream aren't my only coping strategy? So there is nothing wrong with emotional hunger. There's nothing wrong with eating for emotional reasons. But ask yourself, is this one of many tools that I have, or is this my only one? And that can be something that can be explored with your mental health counselor as well. And the fourth is practical hunger. So this one is if there are things that are impacting my ability to notice physical hunger. So I'm going to show you here. Lots of things can impair our ability to notice when our body needs food. And this is coming actually all the way back to the spectrum of eating behavior and what Andrew was talking about, where we can't, it's not, I shouldn't say that intuitive eating is achievable or accessible for everyone, and especially not right away. There are a lot of things that can impair our ability to tune in with our body. Things like trauma, things like prolonged restriction and eating disorders. Sometimes it may not feel safe or may not be possible to check in with how our bodies are feeling. And we need to use what we call practical hunger in order to fuel ourselves for maybe forever or maybe for long periods of time until our body can feel safe and secure again to send us hunger signals. But there can be a lot of things that prevent us from noticing that physical hunger and prevent us from becoming intuitive eaters. So it's okay to practically set alarms in your phone to remind you to eat. It's okay to have a support person remind you to eat or prepare food for you. It's okay to have a meal delivery system set up so that you are reminded that you need to eat dinners, for example. If I don't eat regularly, or I've been restricting for a long time, or I'm on certain medications that suppress my appetite or make me feel nauseated, I might not feel that physical hunger. Other things like cancer and IBD and IBS and food aversions and trauma and stress alone, even caffeine, can all impact my ability to know that my body needs fuel. So that's where that fourth type of hunger comes in, where if you don't feel reliable hunger cues, if you aren't eating every 2 to 4 hours throughout the day, use that clock, use that schedule, use your external tools to guide you and nourish your body adequately until that intuition starts to come back over time, potentially. And use dietitians and mental health counselors to help you get back to that place, because we can help support you along the way.
Yeah. I would just jump in real quick on that if I can, and just say, like, a lot of times I find people will know something's going on, but they don't know why. You know, and more often than not, I find people have had the experience where they go to their family doctor or they go, you know, to whoever the professional is, and they'll find the answer of like, well, here's what's happening medically. And if there's a like physiological, like primary medical issue that's causing the thing, it can get explained there. But a lot of times the psychological side or the why behind why you're doing it like gets missed. And often when we get stuck in patterns, again, there's always reasons we do these things, always. But it's really easy to get stuck in patterns. And if we're in patterns long enough, and especially if there's like a trauma history behind it, or if there's a big emotional piece behind it that's really unbearable, to handle on your own, we get really good at just shoving it down and not even being aware of it. And so that's where the counseling side can really come in handy with some of these issues. I find is if people are going, well, like, I know what's happening, I just don't understand why. And it's not a primary physical health issue, although they're so intertwined, you can't really separate them, in my opinion. That's where we can sometimes come in and help kind of uncover, okay, why could this be happening? What could be leading to this? And it's so easy to just not even be consciously aware of what's driving it.
I agree. Yeah, really good point. Yeah, and the very last piece that I wanted to touch on is that I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but there's a very strong gut-brain connection. We've even been talking about it with IBS and things like that, where our nervous system is fully integrated throughout our gut, and even the bacteria in our gut produce neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. And so think of there being a very direct highway between your brain and your gut. And so your gut health and your gut microbiome will impact how your brain functions and feels, and how your brain functions and feels will impact how your gut functions and feels as well. And so two things that I can see often in people's lifestyle behaviors that can sometimes negatively impact not only their gut health, but then in turn their mental health, is caffeinated beverages and alcoholic beverages. And the reason I mention this is because caffeine is something that we usually all love and sometimes need to function throughout the day. But I mention it because it is a very big gut stimulant. And so if someone is experiencing maybe more anxiety and or coupled with IBS, we see more gut motility, more contractions, more acid production in the gut, quicker movements, and we see a huge suppression in appetite. And so if people are experiencing anything from GERD, poor appetite, GERD is reflux disease or acid reflux. They have maybe looser stools or bloating or cramping. They don't feel hungry for the first 6 hours of the day. All of those things may be linked back to the caffeine. And so exploring ways to maybe ensure that we're eating a full balanced meal alongside the caffeine to potentially lessen some of the effects, or find ways to maybe decrease our caffeine consumption can sometimes help mitigate some of those symptoms. And then alcoholic beverages are a gut irritant. So they irritate the lining of the bowel, and they may increase the number of unhelpful bacteria or negative bacteria that live there. So if people are experiencing things like bloating or abdominal cramping pain, looser stools, even just for example, dehydration or constipation, linking that back to potentially looking at our alcohol consumption, as the more impacts that we have on our gut could potentially come back and impact our mental health as well. So that's a very random place to end, but that's kind of all of the little pieces that I wanted to touch on. And of course, it is a lot more complex than that, but if we're kind of looking at strategies or things that can set us up for success and lead to consistent, balanced eating, things that can lead to hopefully getting more of those 4 key nutrients that we often sometimes find ourselves deficient in Canada, and find ways to incorporate mindfulness and even just giving ourselves grace for eating for different reasons other than physical hunger, we're well on our way to having, I think, a better relationship with nutrition and our mental well-being. Thank you.
Awesome. That's so great. I love doing this kind of stuff because I learn so much. And one of the things I really appreciate about your approach is, sometimes in any profession, we can get very siloed and almost extreme in our views on stuff. And like in any profession, I've had some interactions with folks in the nutrition world that from my vantage point are very siloed, not paying attention to anything else, sort of extreme, only eat this. Oh, this is bad. Don't do this. Or even with IBS, well, don't drink any caffeine or any alcohol, abstain from all this. I'm like, you just took away everything I've ever loved in life. And so one of the things I've appreciated about you in our time knowing each other is like, I refer to you as like the normal people dietitian. It's like, okay, let's figure out what's going on, and let's figure out what like a reasonable approach to this might be. And balancing, like, not, like you say, not just like the nutrition side, which of course is very, very important. But let's look at everything and figure out how to make this doable so that you're not hating life and you're managing, if you have a health condition, we're managing that well. If you're struggling with mental health, how do we support that well? And, it's great. And again, from my vantage point as a mental health professional, I really appreciate your balanced view, and also that you're not like, well, you eat this and that's why you're depressed. Like, no, that's not how that works. And like you say, there is a very direct link between our nutrition and our gut health and our just physiology in general and our mental health. And so it is really important. And so, yeah, I really appreciate your perspective. I don't have anything on my end in the Q&A at this point. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves or throw your hand up. And we've got a few minutes here to answer anything you might have. I see a lot of clapping of hands and stuff. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that piece, especially around the causing. Like, I think it's so, even headlines are really quick to say that something in nutrition or a food causes something else. And I can pretty much with 99% certainty say, aside from like gluten causing inflammation in celiac disease, there is no one food that is going to cause anything, cause any disease, cause any condition, cause any specific issue. It's all potentially an influencing factor, but I could eat dessert every single day and that will not cause anything. And so we have to be very careful with, I think the internet needs to be very careful and social media needs to be very careful with the word cause, because things can be related and correlated, but that does not mean that they caused each other. So,
Totally.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have a comment in the chat here just saying, to second what I said, just appreciation for the holistic approach and honoring the whole person without judgment, holding space for us to bring all the parts of ourselves to the table. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I could not agree more.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
If anybody has any other burning questions, you're welcome to pipe up. I had a question actually, Liz, around the caffeine and the alcohol, because one of the challenges I find with caffeine and alcohol is like, there are so many different opinions on like how much is okay, how much is too much. And I know there's no black and white, like this is too much, but in terms of like something like IBS or like just general GI issues or reflux, like, is there some sort of guideline on average that like is a generally safe zone or would be considered risky in terms of like, well, now you're at risk for these things if you're drinking, or enough clarity around the gray, if there is any?
Yeah, totally. So with caffeine, I mean, when it comes to digestive symptoms and IBS, everyone's so different, and I will usually recommend, if people are able, and sometimes there's not, but if people are able, trying an elimination for even like a week or two of one or both of those beverages and seeing if they notice a difference or a change, if they have the opportunity. If people are quite dependent on caffeine or alcohol, then we might explore ways to lessen those effects. But then I usually will recommend, so about under 300 milligrams of caffeine per day. And if I remember correctly, a cup of coffee was about 90 milligrams, depending on how strong it is. So that does work out to be like trying to keep it about less than 3 cups of coffee per day, maybe a little bit more than that. with alcohol, they just recently changed the guidelines for what was considered to be dangerous or binge drinking. I'll have to confirm what those numbers were, but I believe it was 2 to 3 drinks for women per week, and I believe it was 3 to 4 for men per week. But I'll confirm that, and I will send it in the little summary that I send you that you can send it or include maybe in the summary notes of the recording for the YouTube video. But I would say there's 2 categories for alcohol. There's the chronic consumption, people that maybe have 2 glasses of wine with dinner every night. That will have different effects versus people that don't drink all week, but then are binge drinkers on the weekend. And so the binge drinkers, we see alcohol has an impact on the gut and the body for about 5 to 6 days. So the binge drinkers might start to recover and feel better by the end of that week, but then it starts again. Chronic drinkers might feel a lessened impact of that gut irritation and inflammation on a more daily and regular basis and not have that break to rest and recover from it. So looking at your lifestyle and figuring out, do I give my body days of breaks maybe without it? And then when I do consume it, am I maybe limiting it to maybe no more than 2 or 3 as a woman and 3 or 4 as a male in those situations?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, alcohol guidelines have been all over the map.
Yeah, I just saw new ones and I wish I memorized it. But I'll look into it after this.
I know they revised it recently. It was for guys, excluding like any particular health conditions. For guys, it was up to 21 drinks a week was like within the healthy range.
Okay.
And above that was like risk factor level. I think they've adjusted it a little bit lower now. And then they were saying it was like up to 5 a day, was low risk, but like not consistently, but 5 in a particular day.
Yes.
Which always seemed quite high to me.
Yeah.
But and then again, if we have particular health conditions and things like that, or on my side, on the psych side, if you're on meds for anxiety or depression or psychosis or take your pick, like alcohol, caffeine, a lot of these things, including actually natural supplements, are really important to know because I worked in psychiatry for years, inpatient, outpatient, and so I'm pretty familiar with most of the meds at this point, and I can't tell you how many times we were trying to chase down why somebody was having like problems with their meds and whatever, and it actually turned out to be one of the natural supplements causing the problem. And again, it's not that there's a problem with the supplement. It's that actually just because it's natural doesn't mean it doesn't interact with meds.
Totally.
And so I always tell people too, like when you're with your health professionals, whether it's dietitians, your doctors, us, like just tell us what you're doing. We don't care. We're not going to judge you.
Yeah.
We just need to know so that we can make sure like we know the full picture and you're safe. And also like if you're telling us on my end, like my meds aren't working, but we don't know what else you're consuming or natural supplements, like we don't have the full picture to help you understand what's going on and what to do about it.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. Yeah, and supplements are tricky because they're not regulated like medications are. And so even if even what's the AG1, that green drink that's being promoted everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, even that, there isn't enough research to support that is safe to consume all of those things all at once, and nutrients compete for absorption, and so it's unlikely that when we're taking so many things all at once that our body's even able to absorb it all. So if we have the ability to get most of it from food, we're minimizing our risk of taking supplements that come from an industry that isn't regulated and isn't well researched in a lot of cases.
Well, and even things like another culprit that I've had before multiple times is St. John's wort, which gets touted as actually as something that can help mental health. And I mean, from my perspective, jury's out about whether it is or isn't.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is actually St. John's wort does interact with some psych meds. And we've had people not tell us they're on it. And then we're going like, man, what is going on here? Not that we prescribe, we're not doctors, but we work with people on meds, and part of our job is to monitor how people are doing. And it's come back, and it's actually St. John's wort, which is supposed to actually help with mental health,
Right.
according to some folks. Another one is supplements from out of country.
Yes.
Whether it's it's usually parts of Asia, at least in my experience, that's where they've been from. And so we might not even know what they are.
Yeah.
And so we've had people like struggling with meds and seeing all kinds of weird effects that we're not used to seeing.
Yeah.
And then when we actually dig into it, we realize, oh, you're taking that, which on its own should be totally fine and has been used all kinds, but actually because you're on this med, it's interacting with that, and that's why this is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And working at VGH, we had a lot of liver failure cases from unregulated supplements and there being contaminants in it. And so it's always helpful to try and minimize those risks as much as we can. Yeah. I looked up the guidelines too. So it's 2 standard drinks per day for women, 3 for men. And then they recommend no more than 10 per week for women and 15 per week for men. But that works out to be 5 days of drinking with 3 at each day for men. And so it's still quite a lot of alcohol. And for someone who might have anxiety or IBS, that could significantly impact their symptoms. So I would say that that's the maximum, but we do see that the impacts of alcohol can be just even from one drink. So knowing your body and paying attention to how your body feels and trying an elimination if you can for a little while and seeing how you feel. Yeah.
Well, I'm aware of our time. And so I just wanted to say we really appreciate you guys spending your time with us. We know time is at a premium. We will be putting the recording onto YouTube. It won't be publicly available by searching, so we'll put it on our social media and send out a link so that, if people want to access it, they can access it that way. And we've got an attendance report, so we'll also, we're going to send a survey out to people. I know it's a pain sometimes. We try to keep them short, but it's really valuable for us to find out, hey, what was helpful, what wasn't helpful, what would you like to see? And then that way we can also send you the link to the video there and the slides so that you have all that information as well for using in future. So again, I want to thank Liz for giving her time tonight and all the valuable information, and thank all of you as well. And if either Liz or us here at the clinic can be of any help to anybody, please give us a shout. That's why we do this. We want to help. And so we're here if we can be of any assistance to you or anybody who's having a tough time. So thanks again. Appreciate you all, and look forward to seeing you again in future.